The 17 candles flickered like dying stars in the cavernous ballroom, their glow reflecting in the silent tears streaming down Emma Townsend's face. Her trembling fingers gripped the wheelchair's armrests as she stared at the untouched three-tiered cake that had cost more than what most families spend on groceries in a month. The $50,000 birthday celebration at Manhattan's exclusive Rosewood Hotel, with its underwater wonderland theme, custom ice sculptures, and gift bags containing limited-edition designer accessories, stretched out before her in a mockery of happiness. Not a single chair was filled. Not one. The deafening silence of the empty room screamed louder than any words could. Her so-called friends had abandoned her the moment her life changed forever. "It's been an hour and 17 minutes, whispered Richard Townsend, the pharmaceutical giant whose name adorned hospital wings and whose face graced Fortune magazine covers. His voice, usually commanding boardrooms with unwavering authority, now cracked with helplessness as he watched his only daughter's 16th birthday crumble into dust. They all RSVP'd yes. Emma's eyes, once bright with a carefree sparkle of youth and privilege, now held the haunted wisdom of someone who had glimpsed mortality too soon. 11 months ago, before the black ice and the screeching tires and the crumpling metal that severed her spinal cord, those same eyes had surveyed this very hotel ballroom at Serena Montgomery's Suite 16, surrounded by laughing friends and admirers. Back when Emma's legs could still carry her across a dance floor. Back when she was still invited into the sacred inner circle of Manhattan's elite teenage society. The accident hadn't just stolen her mobility, it had revealed the paper-thin loyalty of her social world. Her Instagram followers remained, eager for the tragedy porn of watching a rich girl's fall from grace, but her actual friends had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh sun of inconvenience. Having a friend in a wheelchair meant accessibility considerations. It meant slower movements between locations. It meant, God forbid, occasionally being seen with someone who didn't fit the perfect aesthetic they cultivated for their social media feeds. "Perhaps they're just running late, sweetheart," Richard offered weakly, though they both knew it was a lie. Emma's phone hadn't buzzed with a single on-my-way text. The event planner, sensing disaster, had already begun instructing staff to discreetly box up the gourmet hors d'oeuvres that would go uneaten. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Emma. Her father could purchase pharmaceutical companies with a single phone call, command a workforce of thousands, and donate millions to charity galas with a stroke of a pen, yet he couldn't buy his daughter a single genuine friendship. The Townsend penthouse overlooking Central Park housed priceless art, but not a single person who would visit Emma after the accident, when the simple act of getting dressed became a daily mountain to climb. "We should just go home," Emma whispered, her voice raw with the effort of holding back sobs. The words caught in her throat as she looked down at the designer dress her father's personal shopper had selected, deep blue silk that cascaded elegantly around her useless legs, strategically chosen to make her wheelchair seem like a throne rather than a prison. This was a mistake. Richard's assistant approached cautiously, tablet in hand. "Sir, should I instruct the staff to begin packing up the gifts?" The question hung in the air, the final admission of defeat. It was at this precise moment that Mark Jenkins entered the ballroom, pushing a cleaning cart. His faded uniform, the third one he owned, carefully maintained to extend its life, stood in stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him. As a janitor working his second job of the day, Mark was used to being invisible to people like the Townsends. He moved through luxury spaces like a ghost, cleaning up messes while the wealthy pretended not to notice his existence. But unlike the other staff who averted their eyes from the unfolding tragedy, Mark saw the birthday girl, really saw her. Not as the daughter of Richard Townsend, CEO of Townsend Pharmaceuticals with its $87 billion market cap, but as a teenager whose heart was breaking in real time. He recognized the expression on her face because he'd seen it too many times on his own daughter Lily's, the devastating realization that you don't matter to the people you thought cared about you. Mark's mind flashed to Lily's 12th birthday last year, when she'd invited her entire class to their small apartment for homemade cake and games. He'd spent 2 weeks' grocery money on decorations and food, only to have just one child show up. The memory of Lily's brave smile as she pretended not to be devastated still haunted him. What happened next would change both families forever, rippling outward to touch countless lives. Mark Jenkins, a man who had exactly $42.17 in his checking account until next payday, who worked 70 hours a week to keep his daughter in a safer school district, who had never spoken to a CEO in his life, made a decision that defied every social boundary and workplace protocol. Setting aside his cleaning cart, Mark walked directly toward the most powerful man in the room. Several staff members gasped softly. This breach of invisible barriers between service workers and clients could cost him his job, the job he desperately needed to make rent next month. But some things, Mark knew, were more important than paychecks or protocols. Some things were about being human. "Excuse me, Mr. Townsend," Mark said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "I couldn't help noticing it's your daughter's birthday." Richard Townsend's head snapped up at the unexpected interruption, his expression cycling rapidly from irritation to confusion. Who was this maintenance worker addressing him directly? In his world, service staff remained functionally invisible unless summoned. His lips parted, undoubtedly to dismiss the intrusion, when Mark continued speaking. "My daughter Lily is downstairs in the staff break room doing homework while I finish my shift," Mark said, words tumbling out before courage deserted him. "She's 14 and loves birthday parties more than anything. If your daughter wouldn't mind, I think Lily would be honored to help celebrate her special day." The audacity of the suggestion hung in the air. Emma's eyes widened, her tears momentarily suspended by surprise. Richard's assistant took a protective step forward, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield, ready to summon security at her boss's signal. Instead, Richard looked back at his daughter, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time since the accident. Beyond the designer dress and carefully styled hair, beyond the wheelchair that had become her unwanted identifier, he saw the crushing loneliness in her eyes. The same loneliness he'd been too busy building his empire to notice growing like a shadow over the past 11 months. "Emma?" Richard asked softly, deferring to her in a way he rarely did. "Would you like to meet?" "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your daughter's name." "Lily," Mark supplied, his weathered hands fidgeting with the edge of his uniform shirt. "Lily Jenkins." Emma brushed away a tear with trembling fingers. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then stronger. "Yes, I'd like that." 15 minutes later, the ornate double doors of the ballroom swung open again. Mark returned with a teenage girl whose appearance stood in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. Lily Jenkins wore faded jeans with hand-embroidered flowers covering the worn spots, a bright yellow thrift store sweater, and mismatched socks, one striped, one dotted. Her curly hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she carried a battered backpack covered in buttons supporting various social causes. What Lily lacked in designer labels, she made up for with something infinitely more valuable: unfiltered joy. Her face lit up at the sight of the underwater-themed wonderland, her eyes widening as she took in the ice sculptures and cascading decorations. "This is amazing," she exclaimed, completely unaware of the social minefield she was navigating. "I've never seen anything like it. Are those real pearls on the tablecloths?" Mark hung back nervously, but Lily moved with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned to be intimidated by wealth. She walked directly to Emma's wheelchair and extended her hand. "I'm Lily. Dad says it's your birthday. Sweet 16, right? That's so cool. I turn 15 in 3 months. Your cake is absolutely incredible. Did you pick the design? I love the little sugar seahorses." Emma blinked, momentarily stunned by the onslaught of genuine enthusiasm. In her social circle, such naked excitement would be considered mortifyingly uncool. Everything was supposed to be met with carefully cultivated indifference. Excitement was for children and tourists. Yes, I chose the design," Emma replied hesitantly. "The bakery sent over samples, and I liked the vanilla bean with raspberry filling." Vanilla bean with raspberry is literally the best combination ever invented, Lily declared, dropping her backpack and pulling up a chair directly beside Emma's wheelchair, not across from her, not at an awkward distance, but right next to her as if they were already friends. My dad makes this amazing vanilla raspberry bread pudding on special occasions. It's our tradition. Richard watched the interaction with growing astonishment. His daughter, who had barely spoken more than necessary since returning from rehabilitation, was beginning to respond to this stranger's daughter. Emma's shoulders, perpetually tense with self-consciousness about her condition, were visibly relaxing. "Would you like some cake?" Emma offered, her voice gaining strength. There's plenty to go around. I'd love some. But first, Lily rummaged in her backpack and pulled out a slightly squashed paper package tied with yarn. "It's not much, but I always carry an emergency birthday present. You never know when you'll run into a birthday, right?" Emma accepted the small package with genuine curiosity, carefully untying the colorful yarn. Inside was a handmade bracelet of braided threads in shades of blue and green, with small seashells woven into the pattern. "I make these while Dad's working his evening shifts," Lily explained. "The blue and green reminded me of ocean waves, which matches your awesome party theme. Total coincidence, but kind of perfect, right? Here, let me help you put it on." With natural ease, Lily fastened the bracelet around Emma's wrist, her fingers gentle and her chatter continuous. She didn't flinch from touching Emma, didn't treat her as fragile or different, a stark contrast to former friends who seemed afraid paralysis might be contagious. From across the room, Mark watched the scene unfold with a parent's intuitive understanding. His daughter, who had inherited his empathy but none of his shyness, was working her particular magic. Lily had always possessed the gift of making others feel seen, a quality that often drew people to her despite their family's modest circumstances. Richard Townsend moved to stand beside the janitor, both fathers now watching their daughters from the same vantage point, a positioning that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "Your daughter," Richard said quietly, "she's quite remarkable." Mark nodded, pride momentarily overcoming his awareness of their vastly different stations in life. "She's got a big heart. Always has." "Does she know anyone else in the building?" Richard asked, an idea forming. "Any other kids her age?" Mark understood immediately. "The security guard's son is waiting in the lobby. They carpool with us. And the pastry chef's twins are probably still in the kitchen. They sometimes help their mom on weekends." Richard turned to his assistant, who had been hovering nearby. "Invite them all. And call the event coordinator back. The party isn't over. It's just beginning." The transformation that occurred over the next 2 hours defied every expectation. What had begun as a desolate celebration of wealth without warmth bloomed into something authentic and alive. The security guard's 13-year-old son arrived with his prized collection of rare seashells, which he shyly displayed for Emma, who genuinely marveled at each specimen. The pastry chef's twins, 11-year-old girls with flour perpetually dusting their dark curls, emerged from the kitchen with their mother's blessing and taught Emma a clapping game that could be played with just hands, requiring no leg mobility. By the time Emma finally blew out her candles, the grand ballroom had been reclaimed from emptiness. The circle around her wheelchair included no Manhattan elite, no social media influencers, no children of her father's business associates, but it brimmed with laughter that didn't need filtering, with conversations unburdened by calculation. For the first time since the accident, Emma felt the weight of constant performance lift from her shoulders. These new friends expected nothing from her name or her father's connections. They simply enjoyed her company. Watching from a distance as Emma's face transformed, animation returning to features that had grown mask-like with practiced stoicism, Richard Townsend experienced an uncomfortable epiphany. He had spent 16 years attempting to insulate his daughter from struggle through financial abundance, yet in doing so, he had inadvertently isolated her from genuine connection. The children now surrounding her came from families that understood hardship intimately. They had developed resilience not as a theoretical virtue, but as daily necessity. "Your friends from school," Richard overheard Lily asking Emma as they shared a second slice of cake. "Why couldn't they come today?" Emma's fingers tightened around her fork. "They're not really my friends anymore," she admitted, the truth she'd been avoiding for months finally spoken aloud. "After the accident, it was like I became a different species to them. At first they visited, took pictures for Instagram with hashtags about inspiration and bravery. Her voice took on a bitter edge, but when I didn't miraculously recover in a month, when it became clear this was permanent, they drifted away. Being friends with someone in a wheelchair is complicated. It means planning accessible routes, it means patience, it means seeing beyond the condition. Easier to just move on to someone more convenient. Lily's straightforward response cut through months of pretense. Then they were never really your friends to begin with. Real friends adapt. The simple truth of this statement hit Emma with unexpected force. Tears welled in her eyes again, but these weren't born of abandonment. They came from recognition. From finally acknowledging what she had known but refused to accept. "My dad's been saying something similar," Emma confessed, "but I thought he was just trying to make me feel better." "Dads can be pretty smart sometimes," Lily grinned, shooting a fond glance toward Mark, who was now engaged in earnest conversation with Richard near the gift table. The unlikely dialogue between CEO and janitor had begun awkwardly, but was growing increasingly animated. Mark Jenkins, initially deferential and cautious, was now gesturing emphatically as he described the inadequacies of wheelchair accessibility in public schools, knowledge gained through volunteering at a community center where his daughter taught art to children with disabilities. "The ADA requirements are treated as maximums, not minimums," Mark was explaining, his passionate advocacy temporarily overriding his awareness of Richard's status. "Schools install the bare minimum ramp at the steepest allowable grade, then act like they deserve a medal for basic compliance." Rather than taking offense at this unvarnished criticism, Richard was listening with uncharacteristic intensity, occasionally making notes on his phone. The healthcare magnate who commanded armies of consultants and experts was absorbing wisdom from a man who cleaned floors by night and fought bureaucracies by day on behalf of families without resources to hire lawyers. As the impromptu party finally wound down, Emma found herself surrounded by new phone numbers, social media connections, and promises of future gatherings, not at exclusive restaurants or VIP events, but at the public park with accessible pathways, at the community center's adaptive art class, at the twins' modest apartment where their mother had promised to teach a group cooking lesson. "Dad," Emma called out as Richard approached to help navigate her wheelchair toward the exit, "can Lily visit next weekend? She's never seen Central Park from above, and our terrace has the perfect view." The question, so normal, so teenage, so wonderfully ordinary, caught in Richard's throat. How long had it been since Emma had voluntarily invited anyone to their home? How many months had she isolated herself, refusing to let anyone witness her adjustment to this new reality? "Of course," he managed, meeting Mark's eyes over their daughters' heads. "In fact, perhaps the whole Jenkins family would join us for dinner?" Mark's instinct was to decline, to maintain the professional boundaries that kept his world sensibly separated from the rarefied existence of billionaires. But Lily's hopeful expression and Emma's newfound animation made refusal impossible. "We'd be honored," he replied, wondering how he would find something appropriate to wear to a penthouse dinner. As if reading his thoughts, Richard added quietly, "Just come as you are. I think we've all had enough pretense for one lifetime." 3 months later, the Townsend Foundation for Inclusive Design officially launched with an unprecedented mission statement: to bridge the divide between technical accessibility compliance and genuine social inclusion. The Foundation's board featured an unusual composition: corporate leaders alongside service workers, medical specialists alongside parents of disabled children, architects alongside the actually disabled individuals who would use the spaces they designed. Mark Jenkins, still working his maintenance job but now also employed part-time as the Foundation's community outreach coordinator, led a team that visited schools, businesses, and public spaces to assess not just physical accessibility, but cultural inclusivity. His lived experience raising a compassionate daughter in challenging circumstances informed every recommendation. Emma, emboldened by her new circle of friends, became the Foundation's most compelling spokesperson. She addressed boardrooms and community centers alike, her articulate advocacy forcing decision-makers to see beyond compliance checkboxes to the human beings affected by their choices. Richard Townsend, humbled by the recognition of how deeply he had misunderstood what his daughter truly needed, channeled his corporate influence towards systemic change. The man who had once measured value primarily through profit margins now evaluated success by the number of barriers, both physical and social, removed from the paths of those previously excluded. And Lily, whose spontaneous kindness had catalyzed this transformation, continued being exactly who she had always been, a teenager with boundless empathy and the rare courage to cross invisible barriers. The friendship between Emma and Lily flourished not because they were the same, but precisely because they were different, each offering the other a perspective previously unimaginable. On Emma's 17th birthday, exactly 1 year after the party that wasn't, the ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel hosted a very different celebration. This time, the guest list spanned every social stratum of the city. Children arrived in luxury vehicles alongside others who took public transportation. Designer outfits mingled with thrift store finds. What united them wasn't wealth or status, but a simple, powerful truth that Emma now articulated in her welcome speech. True accessibility isn't just about ramps and elevators. It's about creating a world where everyone belongs, where no one sits alone on their birthday, where differences are navigated rather than avoided, where friendship transcends circumstance. Sometimes the most important connections in our lives come from the most unexpected places. As Emma spoke these words, her eyes found Mark Jenkins in the crowd. The man who had risked his job to approach a broken-hearted girl nodded in quiet acknowledgement, his simple act of humanity having rippled outward beyond anything he could have imagined. Some gifts, as both the Townsends and the Jenkins had discovered, were beyond the reach of money, but within the grasp of anyone brave enough to extend a hand across the divide.